Hello, hi, how are you? I'm here once again to continue my influencer journey with you all. Today, I'm going to be kind of doing like a book mid-year wrap-up of everything that I've read thus far this year. Probably by the time I post this, I probably would have read other books by now. So I'm considering mid-year wrap-up to be everything that I've read from January to June. So first of all, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through all the books I've read, and I'm essentially ranking them from worst to best. Take that as you want. I always get annoyed at YouTubers that go on these huge disclaimers about how reading is subjective and you can like what you like and don't like what you don't like. I'm going to assume that you already know this. If a book that you love is low on my list, just know that's fine.
Life goes on.
And frankly, there's nothing I've really hated so far this year. So even if something that you like is low on my list, don't be offended. There's merit with everything that you read. Frankly, if I really hated something, I just wouldn't have finished it. So take that as you want. So basically, you're gonna see me kind of looking at different things at various times. One of the things is that I've already ranked them all on my computer, so I'm gonna be looking at that and just going through things as we go through. And frankly, I'm probably gonna need to look at my phone at my Goodreads account every once in a while, because I kind of have a memory of a goldfish. And frankly, a lot of these books I
hardly remember reading.
Which, that's not on me. It's not on the books.
I have a medically diagnosed ADA recognized disability.
That does affect my memory. So we can blame my parents for that, really.
Anyway,
I'm gonna get started. I will likely put what the book looks like over here post-editing. I don't own any of these books. Frankly, unless I say otherwise, assume that I listen to it on audiobook through my library, because that's basically where I do everything. Because, and this is a different topic that I can do for a video, but basically I've never really been able to read physical books super well because of my ADHD. And discovering audiobooks, especially audiobooks that don't cost like an obscene amount, like they're free because they're through my library. I learned that
it's been a big game changer for me.
So today I'm going to be discussing the 34 books that I've read so far this year, which is pretty great considering that my Goodreads goal is 36. My goal was that I was going to read at least 3 books a month. So I've basically already beaten that, assuming I at least read 2 books in those last 6 months of the year. So good on me, good on me. Granted, when it comes to reading, I'm like a feast or famine type of person. I either read like a book a day or I don't read anything in a month. So that's just kind of how I operate. So
luckily, it all evens out in the end, if you think about it.
how about I just get started here? So the first book that I'm gonna talk about, so this would be like my least favorite, and I don't even really count this as like a least favorite because it's a DNF. And normally I don't include DNFs on my lists, but sometimes if it's a large enough book and I got a good enough way through it, I just count it in my Goodreads, because frankly, If I listen to 8 hours of an audiobook, that's about the average of the books that I read anyway. So I should be able to count that as a full book, in my opinion. So this is in this category. And so since I didn't read it all, I don't think it's fair to say that it's the worst thing out there. But at the same time, I think I have to rate it as my least favorite because I didn't finish it. The other ones I at least all finished. And it is, see, I'm gonna have to pull up my Goodreads so that I know the author's name. Because again, I have a terrible memory. All right, so the first book that's on this list is Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. And I've read a couple of his books. I mostly read them because I've been in a really big nonfiction mood lately. And I've read a couple of his books. I don't think I've read anything that's been like super like mind altering from him yet. But I enjoy them for the most part. I think they're accessible and I think they're interesting. I DNF'd this because it covered similar things that he's already written in the other books that I've listened to of his. And it did so in a way that I just could not follow the plot. And by plot, I mean it's nonfiction, so there's not really a plot. But it just went everywhere. So this is Homo Deus explores the projects, dreams, and nightmares that will shape the 21st century, from overcoming death to creating artificial life. It asks the fundamental questions: where do we go from here? How will we protect this fragile world from our own destructive power? This is the next step. This is the next stage of evolution. So the thesis of this is like talking about what's the next step for humanity. Like what's our next step as humans? And a lot of interesting concepts. He would start going in a chapter and it would go, I swear, every single direction. I just couldn't follow it after a certain point. And it's not that it wasn't interesting, it's not that I don't think it has merit, but I think his other books have a lot more organization and structure to them, and this one, the lack of structure, this just kind of overwhelmed me, frankly. So that's the first one. That's gonna be my least favorite so far mid-year. I should probably talk a little bit less about all of these, otherwise this is gonna be an insanely long video. So I'll try to hurry it up a little bit. Next up, and I guess you could say that this actually is my least favorite book that I read, Uglies by Scott Westfeld. So Uglies is a YA dystopian series. Came out in 2005, so how old was I? Was I like 8? I think it was 8. I read the second book of this series when I was in 7th grade, and I did a book report on it, which was very confusing because I didn't read the first book of it. So there's always been a part of me that longed to actually read the first book of this series. And let me say, as an adult,
oh my god, were these characters annoying?
I think this might have one of the most unlikable protagonists I've ever read in a book series. There's a certain part of me that's like, you know, it's YA. I haven't been into YA in kind of a long time. I feel like when I turned 25, like my frontal lobe finally developed, and it has to be a really good YA book for me to really want to read it. And I don't think this was a really good YA book. I think when you're in middle school and you're kind of discovering different genres, especially dystopian, I could see it being very enjoyable. As a 27-year-old woman, it was not very enjoyable for me. But I did finally fulfill my desire to finally read the first book in this series. So,
You're welcome, 12-year-old self.
Next! The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. I gave this 2.5 stars. And frankly, I think this is more of a it's me, not you situation. And that's partially because I was in a thriller phase when I first got back into reading, which must have been like 3 years ago now.
When I first got back into reading, I read like 100 books that year. It was kind of insane. It was like all I was doing.
But during that time, I read a lot of thrillers. And I have since become very burned out by thrillers, frankly, because I feel like I can predict exactly what happens. I think I need a little more time and space from thrillers, so I haven't been seeking those out. Now, you might ask, then why did you read this book, Hannah, The Sundown Motel, which is kind of clearly a thriller? And frankly, I blame that on Libby. They labeled this a thriller horror, which I understand why they said it was horror, because it's got like a supernatural element to it, you know? And I've been a lot more drawn to horror because it gives me what I liked in my thrillers, but it's not quite as easy for me to predict the ending of horrors. That being said, this was much more thriller than it was horror, and I was just kind of overall disappointed, really. And so it's not the Sundown Motel's fault, it's my own expectations' fault. So there you go. If you wanted to know what it's about, I've kind of forgotten, frankly, but it has like ghosts and a mystery to solve, you know. Ooh, I thought it was a little boring, frankly. Sorry. Up next is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, which this is again more of a
It's me, not you.
situation, personally. I wonder if anyone else feels this way sometimes when you're reading a book. And maybe I feel this way more because I listen to a lot of audiobooks as opposed to reading like a physical book. But I sometimes describe this as like certain books don't
Just feel like mush in my brain.
like I can't really hold on to anything that it's saying to me
Because it just feels like mush.
like I need a little bit of a crunch to it so I can like actually feel like it's tangible.
Sometimes it just feels like mush.
And that's kind of what this book felt like to me. And by that I mean it's like a sci-fi dystopian, which this year I've been very interested in dystopian. I wonder why. Is it the horrible political climate that we're in right now?
Yes.
So I read this, and it's pretty short. So I think it was like a 3 to 4 hour audiobook, maybe 6 hours, which is like kind of nothing to me. I was interested in its premise. It's a little too much description for what I personally like. I think if you're someone who really enjoys atmosphere and you enjoy setting and you're interested in sci-fi or dystopian, I think this would be a really great book for you. It was not that for me. So that's what I have to say about that. The next book is the first book that I read this year. Wow, I read a lot of books that involve the word house. So this is House of Glass by Sarah Pekkanen. And frankly, I think this was like the first of, I need to stop reading thrillers. Because I always read like a description of a thriller and I think that sounds really interesting. And then I read it and I'm always disappointed. And I think this was like the book that I read that was like my last thriller besides The Sundown Motel, which I kind of went into already. And I kind of just decided to tell myself, like, you know what? Let's give thrillers a break. Let's give thrillers a break right now. So the House of Glass, I thought it had an interesting premise. It's about a lawyer who is taking on this case for, or is she a lawyer or is she like a social worker? She's like one of the two. She like specializes in like children. So I think she is a lawyer, but she works with children. She's like their advocate. And basically there was this little girl and her babysitter got murdered, and so she's kind of trying to solve the murder. She's helping the girl, she's dealing with the family, and I did find the premise to be pretty interesting. Again, I'm just not in a thriller mood. I think if I read this 3 years ago, I would have really enjoyed it. Just right now, I'm not in the right place for it. So that's why it's pretty low on my rankings. It's not their fault. It's my fault. Okay, next up, and this is one that I don't have a rating for. In fact, I feel a little weird ranking it. So I really like nonfiction. I've been very into nonfiction, and I've always liked true crime. I've become a little bit removed from true crime because I do feel like some aspects of it are exploitative, and I've been trying to remove myself from that. That being said, this book is written by the victim, and it's A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard. If you don't know what the J.C. Dugard case is, frankly, I think it was like the first kind of true crime case that I had ever heard growing up, and it's always just it's always been one that's been in the back of my head. It's a crazy case. So JC was 11 years old when she was kidnapped and abducted by a truly evil man, and he kept her in a shed for, I think it was like 18 years almost. You can imagine what kind of horrors she probably saw. I mean, she gave birth to 2 children, so heavy trigger warning on it for sure. So she wrote a autobiography kind of explaining her perspective. She goes into some of it. She goes into how she kind of have tried healing from the situation. I've always been interested in reading her autobiography, and I have it as a no rating because I don't like to rate people's trauma like that. I think what makes this lower on the list is, JC is not a writer, and that's fine. She doesn't have to be. She's got this horrific story and like something that I think is worth telling, but I think sometimes that can make it not as compelling to read as other things. And so this is kind of like the line of like things I didn't really enjoy reading versus things I did enjoy reading, and this is like true like neutral. I'm not really gonna say that I enjoyed it or I didn't enjoy it, so you can take that as the line right here. So next up, and this one I also didn't rate, but for a very different reason. It's by Frida McFadden, and it's called The Widow's Husband's Secret Life. Now, again, you might be asking, Hannah, I thought you said you didn't want to read thrillers, and you are correct. This is a parody of a thriller. So Frida McFadden, I've never read any of her other work, but she's a very popular thriller writer, and she essentially made a parody version of thrillers. And so, especially since, I've kind of been sick of thrillers, that concept was pretty interesting to me. Plus, this is very much like a novella. It's very short. I think it was like 3 hours of an audiobook, maybe even less. So it was very short to read, and I didn't rate it because like it's like those like spoof movies back in the day, like the 2010s were like scary movie, and I think of like the Twilight spoof that's out. I think objectively all of those movies are god awful. Like they're so bad, but they're also not like trying to be good. Like they're a parody. They're supposed to be like kind of, they're campy bad, and that's what this book was. It wasn't meant to be a good story, a good book. It's meant to be like this campy parody, but it's hard to rate well, but it's also hard for me to say like this is a bad book, because I mean that's kind of what the point of it was. So that one was also a no rating because
You did your job, Frida. You did your job.
All right, next up I have It's in His Kiss by Julia Quinn. So fun fact, when I first got back into reading like 3 years ago, I read all of the Bridgerton books up until Francesca's book. And that's simply because I could go into a whole different video of how I arrange my Libby holds and all of that. But it has to do something with my own weird systems that I set up. And so I've always meant to get back into the series because I do like the Bridgerton books. I don't think they're like great, but they're fun. And, you know, sometimes you just want to read something fun. So this one is Hyacinth's book. She's the youngest daughter of the Bridgerton clan. And
Yeah.
she's cute. I give it 3.5. She's fine. Alright, so next I'm going to get into my 4-star reads. And here's the issue when I rate something 4 stars. It usually means that I recognize that it's pretty good overall. But I rate it 4 stars because I know in my hearts of hearts that I'm not gonna remember what happened in the book in a year's time. So take that as you may with any of these books. I probably don't have a great memory of them. But the first book I have is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by Frank L. Baum. This was just available to read on Libby, like while I was in between holds. So that's kind of why I read it. There's also a part of me that I want to read the books that I was assigned in high school because
I didn't read any of the books that were assigned to me in high school.
don't tell my English teachers. The Wizard of Oz I actually did read when I was in high school. I think that one might take the prize of being the only book that I actually read that I was assigned to read in high school, because it is so short and easy to read. Like, it's basically like a children's book. But there's this part of me that wants to go back and read all of the books that were assigned to me that I didn't actually read. So that's why I read it. It's cute. It's very different from like the movie. It's got some extra things to it, but it's very imaginative. I don't really have much to say about it that probably hasn't been said already. So actually, I'll include these two together because they're by the same author, and one of them isn't rated 4 stars like the rest of this kind of tier is. And it's because I have a lot of mixed opinions on it. So I read 2 of Ashley Winstead's books. I read The Last Housewife and In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. The first one I read was The Last Housewife. And when I say that this was one of the craziest books I've ever read, I'm not lying. Like, I was expecting this to be like normal thriller. Like, it had kind of a culty vibe to it, and I was interested in that aspect, and it is very culty. But oh my gosh, there's so it went into some pretty heavy territory. A lot more than what I was expecting. And here's the thing. This is what I've been kind of searching for in terms of the books that I've been reading, is like, I just want to read stuff that surprises me. I feel like I know the general narrative structures of most books, and so I would really love to just read something that's going to surprise me that I can't predict the ending to. That's what I've been searching for. And I will say that's what The Last Housewife gave to me. I could have never predicted the stuff that was going on in this book. At the same time, oh my goodness, there's a lot of violence towards women. And in that sense, it's like, I don't really want to rate it highly because it's a lot of violence towards women. I was like hooked the entire time I was reading it. And so, you know, usually when that's the case, it's like I want to rate it 5 stars, but I want to rate it 1 star because it was horrifying, and I don't want people thinking that I'm recommending it because then they might think I'm a freak, you know? So I read The Last Housewife and was just very surprised by it. So then I come in and I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, and I'm kind of expecting the same craziness to happen. And I've heard a lot of really good things about In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. And so with the combination of being very hooked by The Last Housewife, if not a little terrified of it, I think I had higher expectations for In My Dreams I Hold a Knife that didn't end up being met by the book itself. So in a way, I think I enjoyed The Last Housewife more than In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, despite the fact that I rated The Last Housewife technically 3.5 stars as opposed to 4 stars, which I gave to In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. But I think I have like almost opposite opinions of them in a way. So I'll just put that together, like those two. All right, after that, I have My Sister the Serial Killer by, I'm so sorry, ma'am, Oyinkan Braithwaite. Oyinka Braithwaite. I'm probably butchering that. I'm very sorry. I've been wanting to read more international books, like books not set in America. So I was interested in this, plus it's kind of my vibe of thriller horror. It's very short, it's not very long to get through. Overall pretty interesting, pretty quick. I'll say this is one that I kind of have a hard time remembering the plot to, but I think it's well written and I think it's interesting. So if you want to just read something short that you can get through, I think this, and you're also interested in like international books to read, I would recommend this. But this is one I kind of, my memory deceives me, to be quite frank. Okay, after that I have another book by Yuval Noah Harari, which is the same author of the book that I DNF'd. This one I liked better. I did give it no rating. I would say it's in this 4-star range. So the book is 21 Lessons of the 21st Century, and I'll be perfectly honest, I think, and this is why I gave it no rating, because I don't think my opinion of it does it justice for the time period that it was written in. And that's because it was written and published in 2018, and I just feel like for the purpose of the book, which was kind of like to set up the sort of things that we need to keep in mind as we're moving towards the future, like the different lessons that we've learned from our past that we should bring to now, I think we've already moved past and have different things that we already need to think about. I mean, first of all, this was published pre-COVID, and we all know how that shaped our lives. And it's also published pre-Trump's second term. It feels behind the time during the year that I read it. And I don't think that's a fair thing to put onto the book. I mean, you could say that really about any nonfiction book ever. Like, there's probably things that are published right now that ultimately aren't gonna matter in 5 years as well. But I think that was something that I just couldn't really get over while I was reading it, was just like the time period of now that I can't really break out of. But I think it's an interesting read, and it had a lot more structure than the other Harari book I read. So up next is We Used to Live Here, which is a horror book by Marcus Cleaver. I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that. This is one as well that I don't really remember the plot of. A haunting debut about two homeowners whose lives are turned upside down when the house's previous residents unexpectedly visit. I do remember that. I can't remember how it ends. I remember I liked it. I thought it was creepy. You know, that's kind of what I want when I read a horror book. It's like, doesn't make me feel creepy, then cool. Oh, I remember there was like a section of it where I was like, basically, I felt very creeped out by it, but I was also like, had no clue of what was happening at some points. I kind of lost the plot for a bit. It was creepy, but I did lose the plot a bit. So it left something to be desired. I wanted a little more explanation to what was going on. But it was pretty creepy. Okay, so after that, I have Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. This is one of the more recent books that I've read, so I actually do have memory of it. And kind of my main takeaway from it is I think compared to the other Grady Hendrix books that I've read his How to Sell a Haunted House, and I read The Southern Vampires for the one with a really long title. I've read both of those. I think this was a much more serious novel that Hendrix put out, because I almost viewed his other novels as being like horror / humor, which I really kind of enjoyed reading. Like, there was a certain campiness to everything that went on that I think kind of alleviates the creepy things that are going on, but there's still like that creepy element. This felt a lot darker, that's for sure. And he delves in with, honestly, a lot of social commentary on, you know, unmarried pregnant girls from the 1970s. So I think it was a good thing that it was more serious, but I don't think it made me enjoy it more than the other Hendrix books that I've read. And so with that, I think it was kind of a little more disappointing than anything else. I think it's a good book. I think if you're interested in the premise, it would be something to look into. And I think if you have read other Hendrix books and you weren't a fan of them, I think this would be a good one to try out if you wanted to retry him, because I think it gives off a very different vibe from what he kind of typically writes, from my opinion. All right, next up, I have The September House by Carissa Orlando, and I remember thinking that this was pretty creepy. I liked how the horror elements, like the supernatural elements, tied in with the kind of more emotional grounding part of the story. I thought that was represented pretty well. And I think overall, I wished it was a little more condensed in its storytelling. There was just certain parts that I thought were a little too long. A woman is determined to stay in her dream home even after it becomes a haunted nightmare in this compulsively readable, twisty, and layered debut novel. Yeah, so I think it's like this woman doesn't want to leave her house. It's like clearly like low-key haunted, and like the daughter's trying to like make her leave, and she's like, no, I want to stay. This is my home. Something like that. Anyway, my next book that I have is, this one was kind of like a very random one that I chose to read, but again, I've been interested in nonfiction, and so that's why I read this. It's called The Body, A Guide for Occupants. It's by Bill Bryson, and it's basically just a book where the narrator takes you through each part of the body and kind of just explains it, and it's kind of like a humor / nonfiction book. I've always said that if I wasn't afraid of needles and blood, if I wasn't a major hypochondriac, and if I was better at science, I would be a doctor, because I've always found medicine and the human body very interesting. It's like a guilty pleasure of mine, to be quite frank.
I just find it really interesting.
It's one of those ones that I read that are kind of more of like, I'm listening to this as if it's a podcast, less than if it's a book. But yeah, it was funny. I liked it. All right, next up I have Dinner for Vampires, Life on a Cult TV Show by Bethany Joy Lenz. So I've never watched One Tree Hill, so I probably wasn't the target audience for this book to begin with, because I think it's very clearly like for One Tree Hill fans, because I guess she was an actress on that show. I wouldn't know, I've never seen it. But basically this is an actress, like while she's on this TV show, she's also like heavily involved in a cult, like a religious cult. And I always find listening to cult books very interesting. So that's why I wanted to check it out, because I wanted to hear about the cult. And, you know, I think this probably would have been more impactful if I was a One Tree Hill fan and I was a fan of hers. But even then, I found it very interesting. You know, she goes into how she got into the cult and how she considered herself someone who wouldn't be susceptible to something like that. And then she goes into like how she started recognizing that it was a cult and how she got out of it and all of that. And overall, I think if you're someone like me who's never seen the show that she was on, but you're interested in hearing about people's perspective of joining and leaving cults, I think this would be a worthwhile book to read. Next up, I have Bridge to Terabithia by Katherine Paterson. So, of course, I knew what the plot was of Bridge to Terabithia because I was traumatized by the movie. I don't remember when the movie came out, but I was probably like 9 or 10, and it was, you know, a solidifying moment of my childhood. So I thought, why not read about it, you know? If you don't know the plot of Bridge to Terabithia, I won't spoil it for you, but basically it deals with the friendship between these two kids, Jess and his new best friend Leslie, who moved in next door. They kind of make this make-believe world. We are in Jess's head, so we kind of learn about what his struggles are. He lives in a pretty poor family with a lot of siblings, and it's like, I think it's set in the 1960s. So there's some commentary on boyhood and almost masculinity in a way, like how boys are expected to act a certain way, but Jess really doesn't fit that stereotype quite as well. And his best friend Leslie is a girl, and she also doesn't fit like the stereotype of being a girl. It's a worthwhile story. I'm always thinking about the movie in the back of my head while listening to it, but it's pretty good. I think we've reached at least halfway on the list.
I'm sorry that this is so long.
Hopefully I'm interesting to you and this isn't just like super boring. Anyway, the next book I have is The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. So this one is I would say it's YA. It's a dystopian novel. It's a very much like this will sound weird, it's kind of like a YA Handmaid's Tale, because the like social issue that it's dealing with is like feminism and patriarchy mainly. It almost has aspects of also like Lord of the Flies. So it's kind of like if Lord of the Flies were a bunch of girls instead. And yeah, I think it was very interesting. I think also I liked the idea more than I liked the execution. Yeah, I almost think that I would love to read this type of story if it wasn't a YA story. So I think what took me out of it the most is that there is a romantic side plot, which I mean, it's a YA dystopian novel, and I feel like that's kind of a prerequisite for YA dystopian. But I think that's what kind of took me out of the story, and it is like a major part of the story as well. And so I almost would have preferred being in this world without this romantic side plot in a way. But otherwise, I think it's very interesting. I would recommend it if you're looking for like YA dystopian, because I think it's a very interesting concept. All right, so this is the last of my 4-star reads. Again, I've read so many books that involve the word house.
I think it's because I've read a lot of horror And a lot of horror books revolve around like a haunted house.
So next up here I have A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. And I thought this was very pleasantly creepy, and I also liked the humor that was added to it. A House with Good Bones explores the dark, twisted roots lurking just beneath the veneer of a perfect home and family. Stepping inside, Sam quickly realizes that her old home isn't what it used to be. Gone is the warm, cluttered charm her mom is known for. Now the walls are painted a sterile white. Her mom jumps at the smallest noise and looks over her shoulder even when she's the only person in the room. And when Sam steps back to clear her head, she finds a jar of teeth hidden beneath a magazine-worthy rose bushes, and vultures are circling the garden above. To find out what's got her mom so frightened in her own home, Sam will go digging for the truth. Alright, so basically it's almost similar to The September Home, and I read them both pretty closely together. When I compare the two, I do like this one more, and I think it was because it had a little more humor and I just liked the writing a bit more. But it's basically about a daughter visiting her mom's house, and her mom's now acting weird because the house is a little weird, and it kind of goes into that whole aspect. But it made me very interested in reading more from Kingfisher and reading more of their novels. So yeah, I've kind of forgot what happened in this one. I just kind of remember I liked it. Anyway, the next one, and the next one that also contains the word house, is Incidents Around the House. And this one I rated 4.5 because, frankly, the added aspect of the narrator sounding like a child and like this book being in the point of view of a child made it extra creepy. I kind of think that if I just read it alone and I didn't listen to the audiobook, I'd be a lot less creeped out. Like I wouldn't have given it 4.5 stars. But there's just something about a child talking about weird things going on that just makes things extra creepy. Also, I mean, what was going on was also super creepy too. But like basically there's this young girl, it's in her point of view, some things are going on with her parents, and then like there's a second mom, and this second mom, it's like there's almost like a Coraline element to this too, which I've never read Coraline, but I found it creepy. I would recommend the audiobook for this, frankly. All right, and next up, and again,
It contains the word house.
I have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is obviously a classic horror. I'm glad I've read it. It's one of those aspects where when you read a classic, I think sometimes what happens is it doesn't feel as impactful for you because you're reading all of the derivatives of the classic. And I think that's what bars this from being like a 5-star read for me, because there was an element of like, this is a little slow. This feels like I kind of know where it's going. But you have to also recognize that it is like the original. It is like this
Anyway,
this is kind of like the haunted house. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think if you're interested in horror and you want to know the origins to it, I would really recommend Haunting of Hill House. It's very well done. After that, and I'll be perfectly honest here, maybe I will cut this part out, maybe I won't.
maybe I'll just be a little funny silly.
I'm anticipating that, one, I'm gonna post this pretty late after I film it, because that's kind of what I'm thinking for all my stuff. I'm kind of trying to film a lot of things before I post them so I can be more consistent with it. So the next one I haven't finished yet. I'm in the middle of it. I'm about 2 hours out from finishing it. So I want to be upfront that this might change. I have an idea of what I'm gonna rate it, and I think it's gonna be 4.5 stars. However, the ending could change that for me. And if that's the case, I will have Editing Hannah come in and make my corrections for myself. But the next book I have is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. The Kite Runner's been something that I've wanted to read for a long time. And again, especially this year, I've been getting into more international novels. So it's definitely been on my radar. The Kite Runner is originally set in Afghanistan. And we follow our protagonist Amir. He eventually moves to the United States with his father. He's relatively wealthy and well off while they're in Afghanistan, but then, and I frankly, I don't know a lot of the history of the Middle East. It's one thing that I want to learn more about. Essentially, like, they live in Afghanistan before all the shit happens to it. So they move to the United States to escape that. However, there are people still back in their homeland that they really cared about, and it's about Amir and his friendship with this boy named Hassan, who is lower class and essentially is like his servant while he's growing up in Afghanistan. And it's him making right with his former best friend while also being in the background of Afghanistan and run by the Taliban, basically. I've enjoyed it so far. I think it's not exactly a 5-star for me because, I don't know, I think there's an aspect to me where the writing style's not always as riveting as I think it could be for me. It almost, I keep thinking that it's a memoir, like it's written like it's a memoir to me sometimes. And so then I remember that it's not a memoir and it almost becomes less impactful to me. And I also wonder if I knew more about the background of Afghanistan before reading this novel, if I'd appreciate it more. There's a certain part of me that's worried that I don't know the full picture, so I don't know what's truthful. I don't know. I think sometimes as a white person, I want to make sure I'm not getting into like white savior territory when reading certain things. I feel a little bit better knowing that the author is from Afghanistan, but with it being written in 2004, I don't know how much has been whitewashed to fit a white audience, if that makes sense. So anyway. Next up, I'm going to talk about these two together because I read them pretty closely and I both didn't rate them. And they're both two of the most insane novels I've ever read in my entire life. But with that being said, they're probably two of the most impactful novels I've ever read in my entire life. So first up here, I'm going to talk about Earthling first. I do like Earthling more than the next one I'm going to talk about, I think. But they're very similar to me. Earthling, I think, might be the most insane book I've ever read in my entire life. So Earthlings is a Japanese novel, and I read Convenience Store Woman maybe 2 years ago. It might have just been 1 year. I think it was 2 years ago. And I was expecting it to be crazier. So then coming into this novel and thinking, well, Convenience Store Woman wasn't as crazy as I thought it was going to be. What's this one going to be? And this exceeded my expectations of crazy. And so this one, it perfectly fit in with like my want of just insane plot devices, frankly. So that's what it's got going for it. It's also got some very gross scenes in it. Like, this is not one to go into without looking at the content warnings if that's something that you're affected by. And it's pretty insane, I'm not gonna lie. I still think about it though to this day. Like, it's a lot. And in a way, it reminds me of the next book I'm going to talk about, which is The Vegetarian. Oh, I guess Earthlings is by Sayaka Murata, and The Vegetarian is by Han Kang. The Vegetarian is a Korean novel. And they have very different premises. So Earthling, you have the protagonist believing that she's an alien. And then in The Vegetarian, you have the protagonist, which I don't know if protagonist is the right word. She is the reason why the plot is moving forward, but she's not like she's not the narrator. You have 3 different narrators who are all a part of this woman's life. And in The Vegetarian, you have this woman who decides to become a vegetarian overnight based off of a dream that she has, and somehow this creates chaos throughout all the people that she lives with. And part of that is because she's essentially like starving herself after a certain point. But I think reading it with Earthlings kind of, I think, put an interesting nuance to both of them, because they were both already pretty like impactful in a way, but also horrifying. Like there's some pretty like grossly violent stuff towards women in both of these novels that can be very off-putting while reading. So I have like, they are both weird translated works that have really graphic sex scenes, body horror, and overall cover a theme of what one does when they feel like they don't fit in societal norms. Like they both dealt with this idea of like people wanting them to fit into a certain box, and they refuse so, and so chaos ensues. And I just found that really interesting, thinking of them both back to back. I overall, I think I liked Earthlings more because there was a little bit more of a like added sense of humor to it. Like it was kind of so bizarre and so campy at points that you're like, what on earth? Whereas The Vegetarian is a lot more serious, I would say. Next up, and I would say these are certainly like my top books of the year, I have The One by John Marrs. So first of all, it's kind of like a sci-fi. I don't know if I'd call it dystopian, but it kind of gets in that way. But it's also kind of like a romance, and it's also kind of like a thriller. It's pretty much like every genre like smushed together. And it goes through this concept of like, what if we developed this system to find out who your perfect match was, and what would that look like? And it has a bunch of different characters who are all dealing with this, right? And they've learned, or maybe they haven't learned, like who their perfect match is. And they're all a bunch of different scenarios, and I think it was very well done. I could see this going in a direction that wouldn't have been quite as enjoyable, but I think it's a cool concept, and it's also well executed. This is kind of like a weird hodgepodge of a book that I would recommend to people to read. I think it's a very interesting concept. So now we're getting into like my 5-star picks. So basically when I pick out that something's a 5-star, it means like I enjoyed it and I was engaged while I was reading it, because I have a tendency of like my mind going places while I read a book. And so to me, a 5-star is like I was very engaged and hooked with the book, and I also really liked it, and I don't have a lot of criticisms to say about the book. So this first of my 5 stars, so you could say this is like my least favorite of my 5-star picks, is Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. It's a nonfiction book about the Galvin family, whose 6 of their 12 kids were diagnosed with schizophrenia. So they were kind of a big component of figuring out how you become schizophrenic, because they were able to look at their genes so closely. The book goes into just kind of like their own family, their family trauma, everything that has gone through with them, as well as like what this family was able to do for just really groundbreaking research regarding the illness. And so I really enjoyed kind of how it balanced the emotional aspect of the family and also the scientific aspect of the illness. I thought it did a really good job with that. Next up, it's another nonfiction read, and I think this is the last book I have that includes the word house. Sometimes with these type of books, I end up not rating them, but I think if I feel as if it is a 5-star read in my opinion. I do rate them the 5 stars. But it is The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom by Sherry Frankie. And if you haven't heard of this family before, they were kind of big in the news. I think last year maybe, it might have been like the year before that. But she is the eldest daughter of Ruby Frankie, who is this
monster
who vlogged her family for years. Sherry's kind of one of the first like children of a vlogging family that has spoken about her story. And I mean, there's the added fact that Ruby Frankie is kind of a sociopath and also had her family join a cult, and that's like completely outside of family vlogging and kind of just made the whole story like even more insane. Is this cult that her mother enters. And so Sherry just, she does a really great job with this book. She also does it in a way where she's very intentional with protecting her minor siblings who frankly had the worst part of this abuse. By the time Ruby is really entering this cult, Sherry has already moved out and has started going to college, and so she almost has this peripheral view of her family just falling apart and just kind of what that was like, especially being so family oriented. It's very well done. Again, I think there's certain times where I read kind of memoirs like this and it doesn't meet my expectations, and so I don't feel like I can comment on them quite as much because it deals with such heavy and personal subject matter. And I think this does kind of the best of both worlds, where it does that while also being just well written and a very compelling story. Super impactful read that I would really recommend. All right, so up next, I have Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Again, this is one of those, I was assigned to read it in high school and I think I only read like 20 pages of it because my ADHD was unmedicated and undiagnosed at the time. Seriously, I think this is a book that especially right now, everyone needs to read. It is so weirdly relevant to the time period that we're in. If you don't know what Fahrenheit 451 is, which is
kind of surprising,
it's a dystopian novel where burning books is, it's a job. Like the protagonist, he starts off where he is a fireman, but what that means is he goes into other people's houses and burns their books if they have any. So this is really just super weirdly relevant to the time that we're in, and I really recommend it. I think it's a really great classic that I think everyone should read. All right, and then now we're getting into my top 4 picks. Ooh. I could see these still being in my top 5 by the end of the year, but who knows what other things I'll read. I shouldn't believe that, because then that will kind of mean that I don't have a really great reading year thus far. But anyway, I have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I am an Abby Jimenez stan. She is one of my favorite authors. Granted, what I love are the Part of Your World book series. Those were the only ones I've read, but they're all 5 stars to me. And Just for the Summer is no exception for that. I just think that she writes such great characters. The protagonists are great. The love interests are so good. I love her. I can't say I will read anything she writes because I've heard other books of hers are a little hit or miss, and frankly I don't want to taint this perfect view that I have of Abby Jimenez. Like, I don't want that. So if something's not getting great reviews, like I just won't read it. I won't let it taint my vision of her. We have Justin and Emma, and they both kind of claim to have this curse where everyone that they date immediately finds their soulmate right after they break up with them. So they both discover that they both have this trait, and so they decide like, oh, we should date each other so that we can break the curse and meet the one later. And you can just assume what happens. It's like not really a fake dating, because like they kind of set up the premise that they need to actually be dating in order for it to work, but it's still it's just great. Almost my favorite romance, but not quite. We will get there. Notice I really don't have a lot of romance on this list, and I used to be a big romance girly, but again, it's kind of the tropey stuff, but I think I do a pretty good job at knowing which books I will actually love, and so those tend to be like pretty high on my list because I pick out the ones that I think I'll like pretty well. All right, so after that I have, and I don't even really know if this is necessarily a book. I got it on Libby, so I'm gonna say it is a book, but it was like 2 hours long. But it was probably 2 of the most impactful hours I've ever spent listening to a book. It's On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. It's by Timothy Snyder, and I think every single American should read this book. It is incredibly important that I think everyone understands what tyranny looks like and what means people use to become a tyrant, because it's weirdly relevant to everything that's going on. And this is all just so incredibly heartbreaking to know that this book was written in 2017. We didn't even know just how bad and how close we are getting to this territory. So I wholeheartedly recommend On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. 2-hour audiobook, super short, but I think just everything about it is super impactful and relevant to what we're dealing with today. And then my next 2, it was so hard for me to choose which one I like better than the other, and I could see myself at the end of the year flip-flopping this, but right now I have as number 2 is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is just such a good book. I loved this book. It was so good. I could not stop listening to it. John Green just has such a way with words, and he's just such an interesting person. And I used to be a huge John Green girly back in the day, back when I was a high schooler and he wrote YA books. And truly this essay collection just blew me away. I think it's definitely my favorite thing that John Green has written, and I just love that I still love him even at the age of 27. Like, I started reading his books probably when I was maybe 15, and like I still just love him, and he still just makes an impact on me. It is just such a good book. If you've ever been interested in essay collections, or even if you think, I don't think I would like an essay collection, I would recommend this book because I think it would change your mind on what nonfiction can do. And yeah, it's just great. I love it. I love it, love it, love it. And finally, my last book, and I feel kind of lame saying this too, because she's everyone's favorite, but my top book. Okay, so this probably might look a little bit different when I put this together because my video stopped filming right before I was gonna talk about my favorite book on the list, so I'm doing this on my phone. Luckily, it's got most of it, but I can't believe I filmed that for like an hour and change, so. Anyway, my number 1 book is Funny Story by Emily Henry, which I've never been an Emily Henry girly, or kind of. So I've never been like a huge Emily Henry fan. I have read all of her stuff up until this book. So maybe that's just wrong, but I had never really like fallen in love with any of her books. I've always thought that they were at most enjoyable, at worst, I didn't care for. And so I was always on this like kind of middle fence with her whenever people would talk about her, which is weird because I feel like the conversation around Emily Henry was always either you loved or hated like her books. Like there wasn't a lot of in between, but that's how I felt. I felt like I was an in between. And something about Funny Story just, it hit me. Yeah, I just thought that it was great. I loved it. I think for me, I just really resonated with the protagonist. Something about her just felt very relatable to me, and I just really liked it. I thought it was really great. I was like almost crying while reading it, and that to me is like a sign of a really good book. So basically the premise of Funny Story is that you have, and I don't remember their names, and I'm having to use my phone right now, so I can't look it up on Goodreads. But you have these two characters whose, if they weren't already their fiancés, they were certainly like their long-term significant others. So the two people, their significant others, got together, leaving these guys off to the side. And so they ended up moving in together because they're like, oh, well, I need a roommate and I need a home, so let's just do it. And I just thought it was so great. I just really liked it. And I don't hear enough people talk about how Funny Story is their favorite Emily Henry. I think it needs to be rated higher for people. So here's my declaration that Funny Story is the best Emily Henry book, and I will hear no slander on that. So anyway, I'm now finally done discussing all 34 books that I've read so far this year. We'll see if I get to 68 at the end of the year. Again, my goal is 36, but I'm just thinking if I've read 34 so far, then that means I should get to 68. But I'm not the most consistent person in the world, so I really doubt that that's gonna be the case. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!